We want to thank you for joining us for another after-hour session with our masterclass. And so thanks for taking the opportunity to download or to listen to this podcast. We're really grateful that you do that. Today at Masterclass, we had Phil Woodworth from Cornerstone Baptist Church and PEI share with us around church culture and about building team and the different dynamics to that. And so, Phil, thank you for your session. It's really good to have you with us. We're also joined today with Debbie Simmons from East Preston in Dartmouth, Halifax area. And we're also joined with Dean Proctor from First Charlottetown. And so to Debbie and Dean, we're really grateful to have you two join us today. Well, let's get... Yeah, no problem at all. Well, let's start. Dean, when we just heard Phil share with us, what maybe did you hear today that you hadn't thought of before or you haven't heard before that just kind of made you go, oh, I'd like to know a little bit more about that?
Well, it was, and you talked about going to a conference, Phil, and your hands getting clammy when you hear other people talk about stuff. For me, the idea of not having targets, of not having goals, just freaks me right out. And so the idea that that's how you operate it was just like, I had never considered that. That just terrifies me. So I would love to know more about how you arrive at a place like that and how you know, okay, we haven't arrived, but we've left. How do you measure that without a target?
One of the weird spaces is, even when you have those goals, it's very weird when people start talking about evaluating where you are on the scale from here to there. I know for me, in the context of here, the goal has already been defined for us. We are to make disciples who grow up into the fullness of Christ, who is the head. That's the goal. And if people are kind of on staff and key volunteers, like, that's their goal too. And that just becomes obvious through time. Like, if you go through a youth ministry season and all of a sudden, like, there's no children coming to know the Lord and no baptisms coming out of that space, if you're working with young adults or adults or whatever, and that's just the obvious fruit of those ministries. It gets weird for me when it's like, well, we have to have 10 this year, and we have to have 15 next year, we have to have 20 the year after. But those are sometimes the goals that are communicated in different places where there's even sometimes financial reward or financial benefits to how you produce or how you perform in your area of ministry. When it comes to those things, I think that fruit, those goals are obvious. The other parts is the church fighting a lot? Like, if the church is always in disarray, if there's always a contentious spirit, then we're missing the mark. And I think how we get together for our annual meetings and how we conduct business with one another, all of those things are like evidences of, are we hitting the stride, so to speak. So I have always found it to be, I'll use extravagant language. I have found it very difficult, like almost like a yoke has been placed around my neck. If someone were to say, Phil, in the next 6 months or the next year, I want these 3 things to be like measurable in your ministry, I find that to be life-sucking rather than life-giving. If those goals were, Phil, in the next 6 months, I want you to spend time with 10 families, that's easy. Like, if that's the kind of goals you mean, sure.
That's easy for you, though, because that's how you're wired, right? Whereas for me, that would be like, oh man, do I really got to do that? Can I just call them? And so, yeah, that's why I think that was so fascinating to hear, because it just like runs right counter to how, as a type A person I am, I'm just like, that's interesting. I want to hear more about that.
What's interesting, I'm severely type A. Like I have high administrative skills, I have high details, all those kinds of things. But that measurable goal out in front of me, that's always created a space of like recoiling against that for me, for my staff, for the people that we lead as volunteers. That's the part of it that makes me really uncomfortable.
Phil, do you think part of that is that, do you feel that some of those tight boundaries within that context of a plan may stunt your creativity or your flexibility?
One, I'm not the most creative person in the world. The other people on staff are incredibly creative. But I don't want to be in ministry for 30 years and have a legacy of, Dean and Debbie are on staff, and after 3 years they're gone because they didn't meet goals. I find that really weird. I don't know. There are some amazing things that we learn from business. I would say it the other way. I think there's amazing things that business has hijacked from the kingdom of heaven, and they're unaware that they've hijacked from the kingdom of heaven. But what becomes weird is when we take some of their things and make it as though it's kingdom of heaven. And when you get into that kind of measurable and, have we had an increased margin of growth and profitability and that stuff, I have always found that to be deeply weird and problematic when it comes to how the economy of heaven functions inside a church family.
Thanks for that. Debbie, what about for you? What did you hear today from Phil that made you go, oh, I hadn't thought about that before, but I'd like to know a little bit more about that?
I enjoyed the entire talk from the beginning when you talked about culture and all of the things that you named under that. The thing that came to mind was humility and fruit, that this is a church that believes in humility and allows people to walk in that and also to demonstrate the fruit of the Spirit. But how do you get those that may have had a different mindset going into this on board? So, for example, we may use like a tool of some sort to work out what gifts they may have, and then align them with that. How do you do that without using one of those tools?
Sure. So on the paid staff side of things, when someone arrives and they're presented with there's no more targets, they love it. I don't have to work hard to convince them otherwise. They are actually more suspicious of like, are you serious? Like, you mean that there's not going to be a report card of some form every 6 months to a year? So on that side, they're like, I love this place, and they don't even know this place yet. With the situations of like someone who's come out of a place and they've used this tool before, I am all for tools and ways of discovery. But one of the things that I call me old-fashioned, I just love talking with Debbie, and it's not going to take long for me to find out what Debbie loves. Ergo, that might be her spiritual gift. That might be her passion for the Lord and the gospel. And I would sooner trust that instinct in the relational side of church life to really encourage and allow Debbie to flourish than run a, this is going to sound like I'm overly negative towards him, than to run some grid that could be just flat out wrong and Debbie be frustrated because that's not what Debbie loves to do. I would much sooner have a staff that are deeply engaged with people in their lives on a relational grassroots level that like I can approach and say, Debbie, would you love to do something like this? Because I get a feeling that you love this stuff. And that seems to be what wins the day The program works great because it fills a calendar. It's 4 months of a series. It's 4 Tuesday nights of we'll all come together in discovery. It's great. It fills a calendar, but I don't think it can ever displace the time with people and discovering what they really love, and encouraging them to use those gifts in the context of the community of faith that they are part of.
Thank you. Great.
I mean, when I hear that, I'm thinking, and Dean, you can jump in too. Like, you can jump in on Debbie's question, and Debbie can jump in on yours as well. But when I hear that, it's almost like I have this image of Goldilocks and the three, and going in and trying to find the right bed to kind of fit. And there's a sense of, in doing ministry, sometimes you need to try something and realize that that's not the fit, and that God and the Spirit will use that and kind of go, well, I think that's where I'm at, but actually, no, this is probably where I'm more suited to be engaged in the kingdom work. And so I appreciate that there seems to be that built-in flexibility for someone to have that freedom to discover and process that through.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's key for making everyone feel at home in their setting of the family church, the community type setting. So yeah, great.
So the second question that we want to delve into just really is, what did you find that was pure gold that you kind of go, I'm going to use that, at my next board meeting, or I'm going to use that at my next staff meeting, or whatever the case may be. Dean, let's go back to you.
Sure. So I love the septic tank story, Phil. I think that's like the extreme example of servanthood, right? You read the example that's used is stacking chairs. If the lead pastor won't stack the chairs, then there's a problem with your servant heart there. You took that to like a really weird extension there and took us into a septic tank, which makes the point, but makes it so much stronger. Because leaders go first, right? Like it's not cool for me to say, I want you to do this if I'm not prepared to be there right alongside you, however messy it gets. I just think that's brilliant, and I think more of our leaders need to realize that. I think sometimes we're into titles and we're into letters after our names and stuff like that, and the big office, when really it's about, are you prepared to crawl into the septic tank? Which is also a great analogy for ministry, but I'll just leave it there.
I love the idea myself of you talked about grace, and if ever there was a time that we need some grace, I believe it's all the time, and especially in the church, and especially at church meetings, and when we're getting together and we're discussing things. So, with the grace that you described about no blame on the person. If you try something and you fail, then that's okay, so we'll try something different. I like that. That's what you do within your church, and you allow people that freedom to make mistakes, or and to not look down on them. That's what the church should be anyway, And so you described that, and
mistakes, right?
Yeah,
they have to be making different mistakes
exactly
each time, not the same one over and over.
Exactly, but I think it's that learning piece, right? Like you learn from your mistakes, and so you move on from that, and that's to me is growth. It's not saying that you're stagnant, you're not going to move on. It's actually allowing the church to grow, and so I think that that's very important. Thank you.
Dean, to your question about the metrics, it's been going around my head since you asked it. My metrics, I guess, would be very much in that space of, do people get along? Do they like spending time with each other? Those would be the spaces of like, are we hitting the mark? Those would be the ones on a very relational level that I pay attention to as barometers over some of the other ones that are more obvious and vision savvy, so to speak.
I mean, nickels and noses, right? Like attendance and budget is not the indication of a successful or effective kingdom ministry. It's one of the last indicators. But I think there are indicators, and that's why I found that so fascinating.
Sure.
I was thinking just around that whole conversation about how do you diagnose when it's gone off the rails, and I like if it's not good work. It's like there will be flags that will go up as indicators. And Phil, I'm just kind of wondering, do you have, where you don't have that kind of framework that we talked about before, do you have some areas where you're looking for flags that might pop up? Like, you said relationships, or if we're struggling to get along, are there other indicators that might just be flags that pop up to kind of say, oh, okay, pay attention to that?
There are always indicators, and given who I am and the people that are here, I think it's really on that relational side where, if Dean is, the new guy that has a new idea and he's been given some money and away he goes, and after 6 to 8 months, no one's with him, no one wants to go to anything he's doing. There's probably been an email or two expressing some concern around Dean and his lack of whatever. Those are all indicators. And we try hard to pay attention to those kinds of indicators, because that's where I would spend most of my energy with people, are just paying attention to those kinds of indicators in the ministry and the lives of the ones that we're pastoring.
I appreciate that. Yeah. Debbie, any last thoughts for you?
What during COVID, just an idea of how you are reaching, is there anything new that you're doing that, you could share with us that perhaps we're not doing right now, that is just an exciting thing that
nothing new, but just the continuation of the same things, just done a little bit differently. I don't think there's anything.
Children's ministry.
Yeah, like that. Like there's certainly parts that struggled through COVID, where you have 250 kids on a Sunday morning, and all of a sudden you can't have 10.
That's right.
So we have gone through all those challenges. Like a Sunday morning here was our first kind of week back with somewhat feeling of normal, with 50% capacity in the building. And the first announcement was it's time to rebuild Cornwall. Cornwall has struggled mightily through the pandemic, where Stratford and Montague, their sizes, it didn't have anywhere near the impact on them. Congregations of 40 people, 60 people, 70 people. There were certainly moments that they didn't enjoy, but it didn't have the same frustrating, devastating, the people can't come together for anything kind of moments. And I know nothing new through COVID, but just trying to feed as many people as we can, trying to meet as many needs as we can, trying to offer as many cups of cold water as we can in whatever. Well, this week we can only do that with a group of 10, so we're going to do it in 10. Next week it's 50, it's 50. So that was the challenge all the way through COVID. But nothing new. We've leveraged, I think, the online stuff more than we ever have before, but not in a way that, it's there's parts of church life that I'm like, if we go all in on online stuff, then we're just going to become completely irrelevant to life. So there was a moment early in COVID where we were trying to get our online video stuff good, because it was terrible, because we didn't know what we were doing. And it was like week 4 where conversation with the elders board is like, we will be completely satisfied with a 7 out of 10. Like the amount of time and money that it's going to take to go from a 7 to a 9 or 9.5, we're just not going to do that. And if we go there, then we're just going to miss what we're supposed to do. We're going to waste a lot of treasure and resources. So we were content with 7, and and didn't want to ever get away from the people side of ministry. And that's been one of the challenges, trying to navigate people in a season when you can't be with people. I think a helpful analogy that we used later, it came much later than I would have liked, was as public health was, giving measures of medicine to keep the pandemic spread from happening. Often doctors would give you other medication to offset that medication that you needed to take. So we started to adopt we are the other medication that people need to offset the other medication that they need. Mm-hmm. So it was trying to figure out how do we, what baby aspirin do we need to take in light of this pill that we have to take, and just tried to come alongside people in that way.
Dean, anything else kind of swirling around?
No, it's just been great to be part of this conversation, to hear what's happening, a stone's throw away from where I am, but yet a completely different context with a completely different, perspective. And it's good to learn from and good to hear about. So I appreciate you sharing today.
Dean, I've eavesdropped on you a few times online, and I'll say I love how you communicate. I love your teaching style. If I wasn't working at a place like this, I would certainly go to a place like yours. It was great. I appreciate you very much.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
That's great.
Well, listen, I want to thank you both. All three of you, Dean, Debbie, Phil. Thank you so much for this time. Phil, before we go, anything else that you thought, I wish I had said that, or maybe I could say this? I'm going to give you another opportunity just to kind of.
We've made church to be quite complicated, and it's not complicated. It's someone has to be in a pulpit that loves the Lord and can talk half decent. A 7 out of 10 will do. People, like God's people, come together, and I've had to come to a place where I've stopped reading church growth books, church leadership books, all that stuff, because I find it exhausting and keeps me busy on the levels that would look good on paper, but creates almost like a panic. Like, oh no, I've listened to Dean this week, and now I got to go change everything, and now I listen to Garth this week, and Debbie next week, and I got to go change all that stuff. And I find that church leaders almost feel like they're caught in this giant kind of wheel, and you're just a mouse that's turning it over and over and over. And for my own health and safety and well-being, I've just stopped reading, stopped that type of stuff, and really try to center down on the church is a place where the gospel is talked about well. The church is a place where we care for each other well. And the church is a place where we try to do stuff for others well. And if pastors would ground themselves in some of those more pillar things, I think there would be this deeply satisfying world that we live in as we go forward in the name of Christ in the context of church life.
Phil, thank you so much for taking the time. We're so grateful that you're part of our family, and so excited about the work that you share on PEI with the rest of our churches there. And so blessings on you. And again, Dean, so great to have you in the East. We're glad to have you join our family of churches as well. And Debbie as well. Have so appreciated the work that you do in the congregation in North Preston. So thank you so much for joining me.